Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Professional Development, the New York City Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Noah, and today I'd like to tell you the story of how I became acquainted with an organization called Educators for Excellence. This group purports to be a nonprofit organization advocating teacher-led change and ensuring that teachers have a leading voice in the policies that impact their students and profession. This story, however, is about how I came to learn that these goals are really more in line with what the UFT does as a teachers union, and that this organization, on the other hand, is actually an AstroTurf front for moneyed interests working to defund public schools and concentrate public funds further into charters in cities across the country. It was Friday, the week before Thanksgiving break. The school was a little quieter than usual because there were no students around, save for those who had come to the building with their parents for parent-teacher conferences. I am not an advisor, so I do not have a central role on parent-teacher conference days. I used the time that this afforded me to clean and organize my classroom, which had taken a beating since the beginning of the school year. I rewound instrument cables, swept up rosin dust and regular dust from the hard-to-reach corners of the room, and tuned up any stringed instruments that were sitting around. I also got a little bit of floor space back in my instrument closet. This has been my never-ending project of the past 4.25 years, and hopefully, this little bit of floor space will continue to grow. It was in the midst of this organizing and cleaning that one of my colleagues in the building came into the room. She is not an advisor either, so I suspected her day had looked somewhat like mine, returning a war-torn classroom gradebook and inbox to acceptable early marking period baselines. I took a little break from rewiring my classroom sound system so that I could more capably shoot the breeze with my colleague. And after a bit of this, she got to the reason for her visit. She would be out on Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, and she needed someone to fill in for her in coordinating the E4E breakfast. A blank stare from me indicated that I had not read the email about the E4E breakfast. So she explained. E4E is Educators for Excellence. It's an organization that works to get teachers involved in the domain of education policy. They would be providing breakfast on Wednesday for teachers at our school who signed up using a Google form that she had sent out a couple weeks ago. Again, that was an email I dodged based on the subject line, so it seems there's no such thing as a free breakfast if you delete emails with too itchy a trigger finger. This sounded like a task that would require minimal effort and no real cost to my prior obligations. And I always try to be an agreeable colleague. So I said I'd do it. After my colleague left, I sat for a moment, summoning up the energy to return to my previous state of flying around the room, cleaning, organizing, and standing in corners to try to manually zoom out and think of the bigger picture. There was something nagging at me in the back of my mind, but it didn't present itself as a full-on question until lunchtime. The UFT is one of the strongest teacher unions in the country, one of the strongest unions in general, and it already has its hands in education policy. So why would an additional organization need to exist for the purpose of getting teachers involved in education policy? And what kind of absolutely meaningless name was Educators for Excellence? I took to Google to see what I could find out about the organization. Their website is very clean. The design is beautiful. That was my first red flag. In the field of education, very few organizations have any concept of good design and user experience. In the DOE, you have to use Internet Explorer to access certain web portals. If you are frustrated to the point of rage quitting your own application for a salary differential, you know you're right at home in the safety of the Internet's educational sector. If, alternatively, You find yourself looking at professionally framed photographs and navigating pages seamlessly. You know somebody put some money into an image they are hoping to create for themselves. That's just not how we do things in public education. Should we? Of course. But who has the time and resources to devote to image curation? In perusing the website, I see some featured content on anti-racism in the classroom and culturally relevant pedagogy. No complaints there. But then, scrolling down a bit, there is a section on the landing page for links to blog posts. This is where the organization starts to reveal itself a bit. There are 6 blog posts here ranging from March 3rd, 2021 to November 3rd, 2021. These are highlights as you can navigate manually to a longer list of other blog posts. Even still, their output is about 1 or 2 posts per month. Not too terribly prolific. The posts themselves are fairly empty. While reading through some of the content, I get a sense that I'm walking through a movie set. There are storefronts, but when you walk through the entrances, you see there's nothing behind the storefronts but plywood scaffolding. I wonder if the posts themselves might be loaded with terms for search engine optimization without any actual content. Here's one particularly illustrative example.
September 7th, 2021. E4E Vaccine and Mask Position Statement. The pandemic continues to make life hard for all of us, and we are nowhere near normal. We learned many lessons over the last 18 months, but perhaps the hardest was that online learning exacerbated educational inequalities and created unparalleled levels of learning loss, on top of straining educators more than ever. As school districts around the nation return to in-person learning, creating fresh debate over masks and vaccine mandates.
First of all, love an education-related piece of writing with a typo in the opening paragraph. This organization pays out salaries between $130K and $220K, but nobody can be bothered to edit the writing showing up on the homepage. I wonder if I might be the first person reading it, the only person to show up to the movie set. Anyway, the piece continues.
It is imperative that we get students back in school with teachers to continue to recover from unfinished learning. To do this effectively, it is important that educators create safe and healthy learning environments for all students. We have the information and tools to begin repairing the damage done by the last school year. We call on districts across the country to exhibit the will to put educator and student safety first.
And this is how you know this wasn't really written by a teacher. We do talk about learning loss sometimes, but during the summer, nobody I know would say their teaching this past year caused damage. Poverty caused damage. Inequitable access to resources caused damage. This is the case every year, though. Remote instruction made the effects of poverty and inequitable access more stark, but remote instruction itself was not the source of harm. Placing blame for the failures of the education system at the feet of educators is not a pro-teacher stance. It is a popular stance, but it is not the stance one would expect to get from a teacher-led group. And all of this is to say nothing of the fact that this position statement is meant to deal with mask and vaccine mandates, which the writer of the statement supposedly favors. What purpose could a casual accusation of damage serve to the overall intention of this statement? This is far from the most egregious writing on the blog, though.
July 27th, 2021. E4E Teacher Board Members. We need our unions to lead. As current classroom educators, we owe labor unions, and particularly teachers' unions, a great debt for all they have won for us. Throughout history, unions have supported marginalized workers against the greater forces of power and privilege in capitalist systems. Thanks to our predecessors in the labor movement, we have access to healthcare, pensions, and improving pay, as well as protection from capricious management decisions that affect our livelihoods. And thanks to our current teachers union leaders who boldly fight today, educators and our students have safer working conditions and school reopening standards that prioritize the health of teachers and students alike. Today, our unions are powerful in part because the public knows our actions are instrumental to student success. Their learning, their emotional and physical health, their access to resources, and their right to be accepted as who they are. From collective bargaining and political endorsements to influencing the narratives and cultures within our schools, our teachers' unions have the opportunity to continue to shape our education system for the better. That's why we commit to strengthening our unions, so they can leverage their power and influence to bring about the changes our students need. How and to what ends our unions leverage their power matter tremendously to our profession, to our students, and to the broader communities we serve.
So far, so good. Strengthening unions, leveraging power and influence for the benefit of students. I'm all in. Our working conditions are their learning conditions. Solidarity forever. However, it's about to take a turn.
We need teachers' unions that represent us well and reflect the great diversity among our ranks that is our strength. It is up to us, their members, to guide them forward. We recognize that our unions have been complicit, if not active, in perpetuating racism and oppression within the school system as well as within the union itself. We have seen our unions defend ineffective educators, racist policies, i.e. licensure, job placement, layoff, and student discipline policies as examples, and biased systems rather than our students. Too often, we have seen our unions defend inequitable educational conditions, oppose innovative practices, organize using divisive and fear-based tactics, and otherwise obstruct progress rather than embrace opportunities for change. We have felt strong-armed and scrutinized by our own union leaders when voicing dissenting opinions. We and our colleagues have run for elected office within our unions only to see leaders employ the same undemocratic and unfair practices, i.e. limiting voting, providing incumbents but not challengers access to member information, etc., that they critique in public educational processes. In the broader national landscape where voter suppression efforts are being made by elected leaders, our unions must model what democracy should look like. Our unions can and must do better than this.
That escalated quickly. I wouldn't necessarily say I disagree with all of this. Even on this show, we've devoted some time to some of the UFT's troubled history. But that is as union members, meaning to exert pressure from within, which is how democratic systems are meant to function. It is also with the understanding that the union is not in charge of most of the sources of racism and oppression, and if anything, is already fighting the actual sources. The union, after all, is not in charge of hiring at the schools. It advocates for higher salaries and greater benefits in each contract negotiation. That's its primary purpose. It protects the due process of its members, including members targeted through discriminatory practices. I will be the first to admit that there are ugly things happening in the union, but those ugly things can be called out specifically rather than vaguely attributed to the union as a whole. Specificity is essential in addressing issues within the union without giving ammunition to anti-union forces. They have enough ammunition already, along with essentially unlimited resources. Speaking of which, this is as good a time as any to bring up the most worrisome aspect of the organization, which is its relationship with the Walton family. Yes, that Walton family. The owners of Walmart and the wealthiest family in the US. The Waltons gave E4E over $1.3 million per year on average between 2015 and 2020. The organization's total support and revenue in the 2019 to 2020 fiscal year was $11,450,123, meaning that the Waltons covered over 10% of the tab. Should this impact our reading of this blog post? Probably. And here's why. Walmart employs 2.3 million people worldwide, and next to none of them are unionized. In fact, when the butcher's department at one Walmart in Texas successfully passed a vote to unionize, the department was shut down, along with the butcher's departments in 179 other stores in the state. Walmart preferred to sell prepackaged meat over dealing with unionized workers. Since then, they have developed propaganda videos that all new hires are required to watch, deriding unions and mocking the services they provide union members. Walmart has a union-busting strike force. They fly out in a corporate jet within 24 hours of evidence of union organizing turning up in a Walmart store. Meanwhile, Walmart is the leading employer of people in the US who rely on welfare assistance to make ends meet in spite of having a job. What that means is that Walmart mobilizes a vast array of anti-union resources at a moment's notice in order to continue paying workers insufficient wages. Taxpayers, in turn, subsidize Walmart's low wages and shoddy benefits through welfare. As a result, Walmart's profits are not impacted by the inconvenience of, paying a living wage. Some of our tax dollars keep their workers alive, the Waltons get richer, and they can use some of these profits, ill-gotten as they are, as charitable gifts to nonprofits like Educators for Excellence, in a process that decreases their own tax liability, thus keeping their profits safe from contributing to the same welfare system they are forcing their workers to depend on. It's pretty egregious. So for those of you keeping track at home, the article we're reading is about how teachers' unions should function, written by an organization that draws over 10% of its budget from the Walton family, which is one of the most virulent anti-union actors in the world, since it depends on anti-union practices to ensure that its profits are orders of magnitude greater than they have any right to expect. Now that we know who we're hearing from, let's read E4E's prescriptions for how unions should lead.
Transformational teachers' unions are student-focused. They consider every decision through a lens of how students will be impacted, prioritizing choices that promote equity and excellence for all of our children, particularly those who have been traditionally underserved by our school system. Transformational teachers' unions elevate the teaching profession, leading the charge for high-quality instruction for every student, embracing differentiation to allow great teachers to stay and grow, and setting the tone of conversations to ensure teachers are treated with dignity and respect. Transformational teachers' unions are actively anti-racist in words and actions. They recognize that racism exists within the union, its members, and within the education system more broadly. They fight for policies and practices to reverse the negative impacts of systemic inequity based on race, even those that challenge their own power or history. Transformational teachers' unions are democratic, truly guided and governed by their members. They focus on engaging, educating, and enfranchising their members to enable meaningful participation, diverse voices, and new ideas.
Well, who could argue with that? Here's the thing, though. Try to imagine how any of the following steps would look in practice in our own specific context of the UFT and the NYC DOE. Let's start with steps towards becoming more student-focused.
Recognize the connection between our students' educational outcomes and prospects for social and economic equity in our broader society, and therefore focus on improving educational outcomes as their central goal. Prioritize equity and excellence in their policy proposals and priorities, centering the needs in particular of vulnerable student communities, including Black, Indigenous, and people of color, students with disabilities, LGBTQ+ students, English learners, students experiencing housing insecurity, and students from low-income households. See themselves as an extension of the public education system and are, therefore, accountable to not only their members, but also the community of students and families where they serve. bargain for the common good of the broader school community, fighting for social and racial justice within the educational system and beyond.
Recognize, see themselves as. Now, those are some actionable verbs. The authors of this piece seem to suggest unions need to lead the way by rewriting completely disingenuous mission statements. Now, prioritizing equity and excellence is getting warmer, but if you're looking for sources of disparity in education, there are a few better places to start than with the UFT. Typically, the UFT is on the opposite side of the bargaining table from these parties. So essentially, you're preaching to the choir here. One place you might want to start in addressing inequity within the DOE is with standardized testing. Interestingly enough, a pro-standardized testing stance is one of very few actually actionable items in this list of mostly fluff and search engine optimization, as we will soon find out.
Promote research-based, culturally responsive instructional practices, innovative teaching practices, and differentiated pedagogy to ensure teachers are truly reaching all students. Recognize that to recruit and retain diverse, talented educators, they must empower teachers to grow their expertise, exercise professional autonomy, and expand their leadership throughout their careers. Use multiple measures of educator effectiveness, and not just seniority, to determine pay and career path opportunities. Advocate for pay and benefits that better reflect teachers' tremendous contributions to our students and our society more broadly. Foster the creation of positive, healthy, and collaborative workplaces that allow teachers to thrive professionally.
Did you catch it? The one actionable item hidden in a pile of toothless mumbo-jumbo? Use multiple measures of educator effectiveness, and not just seniority, to determine pay and career path opportunities. What might these multiple measures be in a system where accountability is determined through standardized testing? Why, standardized tests, of course. The very same drivers of inequity that have been on the scene at every major unfair neoliberal redistribution of resources in public schools nationwide in the past 50 years. Paying teachers merit pay for standardized test results when the tests are standardized but student circumstances are not would embed a perverse incentive smack dab in the middle of a school system along lines of poverty. Why work in a school where students have no chance of scoring high enough to earn you your pay bump? Why not go work in the wealthier neighborhood school where the test was essentially written for your student population and high scores are guaranteed? Collective bargaining is impossible as a union if you divide your membership across the lines of merit pay. Enemies of public schools love pulling this card, and this is why. Collective bargaining is the UFT's greatest strength at the moment, since it's unwilling or unable to strike, except in the most dire of circumstances. So drawing a few union members away with the promise of extra pay is a very small price if the possible outcome is the eventual failure of collective bargaining, and thus the union. So union members, be sure to ask your chapter leaders and district reps to advocate for merit pay over collective bargaining. In fact, insist on it, because the alternative would be a failure to elevate the teaching profession. It is within the sole purview of your union to fix systemic problems, and not that of the DOE and policymakers the UFT is purpose-built to check. That was sarcasm, of course. This is just a tremendously flawed position. That's enough of that for now, though. If you would like to read more empty recommendations that are not actionable, not within the purview of the union, directly in conflict with the interests of union members, or something the UFT is already doing, by all means, look this stuff up on the E4E website. So this has been a brief overview of red flags I found in E4E's own website. But to give credit where credit is due, the reason I knew within just a few minutes of Googling E4E that I would have to back out of helping to facilitate this breakfast is the following post by the Chicago Teachers Union. Educators for Excellence, E4E, is making the rounds at Chicago public schools, offering lunch and a chance to join their organization. We urge CTU members to be wary of this group. E4E was founded as part of the corporate reform movement, the folks who brought us teacher evaluation tied to student test scores, non-union charter schools with publicly unaccountable boards, and the idea that poverty and inadequate funding are excuses for poor academic outcomes. The original declaration that E4E required teachers to sign before joining the organization included pledging allegiance to pay for performance and school choice. E4E has since created a new declaration, which is more ambiguous and includes points about diversity, equity, and poverty. A similar organization, TNTP, formerly known as the New Teacher Project, is known for attacking tenure for teachers and promoting the myth that bad teachers are a major reason for poor student performance. Daniel Weisberg, TNTP CEO, is on E4E's executive board. E4E is also heavily supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Broad Foundation, and the Walton Family Foundation, the big three donors to organizations pushing anti-union agendas. The Gates Foundation in particular gave E4E $4 million in 2016, according to Threat from the Right Intensifies, a report published by the Massachusetts Teachers Association in May of 2018. E4E claims to be a way for teachers to have a voice in public policy decisions, but teachers already have organizations that do that, teachers' unions. The Chicago Teachers Union is your organization made up of thousands of members who advocate for Chicago public school students and families through community engagement, contract fights, electoral campaigns, and legislative processes. The CTU has solicited opinions from thousands of educators, and it is clear that we collectively do not agree with E4E co-founders Sydney Morris and Evan Stone, who said in 2017 Education Post interview with school privatization cheerleader Peter Cunningham that teachers want their unions to focus on improving student achievement and teacher quality. Of course, CTU members want that, but how we achieve those goals is the real story. Through better working conditions, smaller class sizes, more supports for children who need them, and sustainable community schools. We need an end to the Hunger Games style student-based budgeting and school closures. We need equitable and sufficient school funding so every student has what he or she needs, and not just a select few. To expand a bit on the details from the article, Daniel Weisberg was a labor lawyer for the New York City Department of Education prior to joining TNTP. When he was with the DOE, he advocated unsuccessfully for merit pay, but fought the UFT tooth and nail all the same. Sydney Morris and Evan Stone, the co-founders and current co-CEOs of E4E, do not hold teaching certificates and only have about 5 years of TFA teaching experience between the two of them. We've all worked with Sydney Morris's and Evan Stone's. We've talked about them on this show before as well, though not by name. These are the people who do their 2 years of resume building in the public schools, knowing all along that they have bigger and better things waiting for them at the end of their service. Fortunately for us, most of these people leave, and we never hear from them again. Their students miss out on the benefits of learning from caring, committed teachers. Their mentors lose whatever stock they had placed in their mentees' development, but at least we don't have to worry about them coming back to haunt us. But alas, Morris and Stone did not leave all the way when they left their classrooms. Instead, they are repurposing charitable tax dodges from anti-union, anti-public education corporate interests towards free breakfasts that are not free after all, but are instead available for the low cost of your name on a petition that goes against your interests as a worker and as a proponent of public education. And this is the truly evil thing about the organization. They know that we already have it kind of rough. They know our time at home is so limited that the promise of a free breakfast is enough to get our attention. They know that a lot of us can't afford to blow off a free meal. They're not offering us the money that they put towards lobbying. They're not offering us the money that goes towards the 6-digit salaries they pay out to their board. This is a board composed of a few sellout teachers, of course, by the way, but also a ghoul from McKinsey & Company, which is a consulting firm known for, among other things, helping to facilitate spur on and profit from the opioid epidemic in the US, a feat for which it settled for over $500 million in damages back in February of this year. Anyway, teachers aren't getting cut in on any of the dirty money making its way through E4E, save for a crummy breakfast. So we have some idea of the group's beliefs, but beliefs are free. I'm more curious about how they spend the $10 million they pull in from the Waltons, the Gateses, and all of the other billionaires trying to destroy one of the last robust public institutions in the US. When discussing the group at dinner the other day, I couldn't really answer the question, what do they do? I went back to the financial paperwork to see if I could pick up the trail of money and connect it to some actual action. About $2 million went to fundraising in the 2019 to 2020 fiscal year. $3 million went to managerial costs, and of the remaining $10 million they spent in that fiscal year, about half of it went to other salaries and wages not included as part of the board's compensation, which falls under managerial costs. $1 million went to travel and occupancy. Nearly $500,000 went to event expenditures, which I assume accounts for free breakfasts and happy hours. So based on the financial paperwork, this is really just sort of a make-work organization. The people who are sitting on the board, the people who are joining the group and taking on paid work on behalf of the group, they're not making anything other than they're sort of assembling this sort of shadow network that doesn't at first meet the eye as a shadow network of educators. A colleague of mine told me their experiences with the group consisted entirely of happy hours and coffee outings, but the through line in the conversations at these outings involved encouraging members to run for union offices, like chapter leader and delegate. We should be very concerned when an anti-union corporate interest funds a supposedly grassroots group to tell teachers at happy hours to run for union offices. This amounts to an embedding strategy, somewhat akin to Dan Schultz's precinct strategy, whereby far-right activists flood precinct captain positions in the US to help sway national elections by destabilizing them where the votes are cast. In this case, though, the teachers being put up to the task of taking low-level union positions are not consciously activated anti-union activists. They're just teachers who showed up to the wrong happy hour. $15 million a year is a small price for the Waltons and their friends to pay for a network of embedded anti-union sleeper agents within the teachers' union. It's clearly a sort of a long game, though. So the question is whether it will work, whether the happy hours and follow-up emails are enough to radicalize teachers in the wrong direction, or if it'll just be $15 million per year lost, which is honestly not a big deal to the Waltons, especially if it's part of this project that is at the center of making sure that they are able to continue making the windfall profits that they make on a regular basis, which is just this larger policy of fighting unions, destroying unions, making it difficult to be unionized in the United States. I tried to get an interview with anyone from E4E. I sent a half a dozen emails out for this show, but I didn't get a single reply to my email. So all of that said, I told my colleague I would have to back out of helping out with the breakfast. When asked why, I shared an abridged version of the above diatribe with her. She decided over the weekend that she would cancel the breakfast, And so my school's chapter of the UFT, therefore, is safe for another day. And with that, episode 19 of Professional Development, the New York City Teacher Podcast, draws to a close. Thank you so much for joining us this week and for listening. Thank you also for your continued support on Patreon. If, as you're listening, a thought occurs to you of something that you might like to hear differently or future content for episodes that you'd like to hear, please do not hesitate to reach out to professionaldevelopmentpodcast@gmail.com. And, it's always nice to hear from people with either constructive criticism, with positive feedback, or ideas. Whatever you have, we'd love to hear it. This has been a big news week for New York City public schools and teachers and families and students. So there will be some bonus episodes coming out in the coming weeks so that we can keep up with all the stuff that's happening, whether it is developments in COVID, the new testing policies that are allowing teachers maybe to get tested during the school day, or the advocacy work happening around smaller class sizes. Lots of stuff happening, so keep an eye out for those episodes in the coming weeks. And thank you again. See you next week.